Welcome. Today, I'm going to talk to you in this presentation about the Reconstruction era from 1865 to 1877. So we're talking about the time period after the Civil War, post-Civil War. And the Reconstruction era was a 12-year period. So you have a variety of illustrations on this page and pictures. You have Abraham Lincoln, who was the 16th president and president during the Civil War, who was assassinated. And you have Andrew Johnson, who took over for president after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. These two men had different viewpoints in how Reconstruction was to go about. In this corner right here, you have one of my his favorite people with the wild hair, and this is Frederick Douglass, an abolitionist. And up here in this picture, a figment or part of Reconstruction is the rights of African Americans to get the right to vote. These are African American men casting their ballot for the first time. And right here, you have the ruins of the city of Richmond. You had a lot of ruins, you had a lot of destruction, you had a lot of poverty, you had crime, you had disdain, you had disillusionment, you had anger, you had bitterness. And that's seen basically in this picture. You can describe this picture with those words. Over here is a map of the South after Reconstruction. Here's some pictures. This is Charleston, South Carolina. This is Richmond. And this is Columbia, South Carolina. So, you're probably thinking, what was Reconstruction? Let's look at the word Reconstruction. The word construction means to build, make, create, put together. And re is a prefix that means again, do something again, like review, repeat. Okay? So, Reconstruction means to build again, to put together again. Reconstruction was basically a time period and process of readmitting the 11 Confederate states in the South back to the Union after the Civil War. Reconstruction happened between 1865 and 1867. So the South had seceded because they didn't want to go by the rules of the Union or the North. So they broke away one by one, became their own separate country, which led to a civil war. A lot of other factors that led to the Civil War, but that's not important at this time. But you need to understand that this is the time period after the Civil War called Reconstruction. Reconstruction policies were harsh and created problems in the South, particularly among a group called the Radical Republicans. The Radical Republicans were a group of people, politicians, who wanted the South to be punished for seceding from the Union, who wanted Reconstruction to go fast and give African Americans 100% freedom and equality like whites. Also during Reconstruction, it was an attempt to give meaning to the freedom that former enslaved African Americans had achieved. And that was done by way of the Civil Rights Amendments of the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and 15th Amendment. Reconstruction amendments that promoted civil rights for African Americans. Promote means to push for. Your basic provisions of the amendments. The provisions are things that are provided, things that are given to you, things that you gain. 13th Amendment outlawed slavery. Slavery's no more. Can't have slaves in the United States or its territories. Done away with. 14th Amendment gave African American citizenship. They're citizens, they're Americans, and they're protected under the law. It guarantees equal protection under the law, which means that if someone steals an apple and the penalty is that they go to jail, they go to jail. You can't say that if another person steals an apple and they don't go to jail. You can't do that. The law is applied equally. It's applied fairly. The 15th Amendment gave all citizens the right to vote regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So if you were a slave before or were in jail, that's what previous condition of servitude is. Like servitude means to serve. You get the right to vote. But the thing about it is, it really didn't mean anything because Jim Crow laws hampered and restricted that. And we'll talk about that later. So in this page, you need to write down the Reconstruction Amendment that goes with each illustration and explain your matches. And this picture right here is a shackle that's broken. In this picture right here, you're a group of individuals being sworn in as Americans to become citizens. And this right here are people casting their ballot during election day. So you're going to write down the amendment, whether it's 14th, 15th, or 13th, that goes with each picture or illustration, and explain briefly why you say that. Defend your answer. In this application activity, you're going to read these excerpts. I'm not going to read them out loud. You need to identify what amendment goes with each excerpt from the Constitution. It's either the 14th, 13th, or 15th. So you're going to pick that. You're not going to use one amendment more than once. The meat of Reconstruction, so you got to think about like it's a hamburger. And we're talking about the meat right here. Reconstruction policies and problems. Policy means that laws, guidelines that you have to follow. It could be set by government, it could be set by a teacher, it could be set by a business. But in this case, it's talking about the federal government's Reconstruction policies after the Civil War. And that has some problems, and it has some good things. Southern military leaders could not hold public office until like 1872. African Americans could hold public office. Some African Americans became governors, senators, representatives. A policy of Reconstruction was the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And that gave African Americans equal rights. But the only way that could be carried out is by the presence of federal troops for its reinforcement or enforcement. Because down in the South, you still had Southerners who were ex-slave owners and military leaders, and regular citizens in the South who were white who never saw African Americans as their equal or as citizens or as Americans. And in order to make sure African Americans were protected and given equal rights, you had to have federal troops to enforce that. You had Northern soldiers supervise the South because of the Reconstruction Acts. You had the Freedmen's Bureau, which was a program set up by Abraham Lincoln after the Civil War to get African Americans who were former slaves adjusted to daily life of being free. They were called freedmen. The Freedmen's Bureau set up schools, they built libraries, they taught African Americans how to read and write, they built universities across the South, and they basically took the training wheels off the African American, used as a metaphor, so they can be free and live free and adjust. Then you have another policy of Reconstruction that was negative. It says Southerners resented Northern carpetbaggers who took advantage of the South during Reconstruction. And carpetbaggers were Northerners who came down South to help build the Southern economy. Some of them owned railroads. Some of them sold railroad companies and land at low prices. Actually, they bought it at low prices, and they sold it at higher prices. They took advantage of Southerners after the war. The Southerners were disorganized, angry, upset, weak. Because when you're weak, people are going to take advantage of it, particularly if you've been through a war or you've had your neighborhood and your community and your state damaged. Southern states adopted black codes to limit the economic and physical freedoms of former slaves. And that happened directly after the 13th Amendment was passed. And basically, one former slave said, after he was free, he said, I'm free, but I'm still a slave. I'm free, but I'm still a slave. So what that meant was, even though he was free and other African Americans were free, they still were treated like slaves. They weren't treated like citizens. They weren't given equal protection. They weren't given equal rights. And here's a map of the South after Reconstruction. And this is an exercise you're going to do after you've analyzed this map very carefully. We'll probably do this as a class. And another aspect of Reconstruction, you have three important men and their legacies. A legacy is something that you leave behind for people to remember you by. You have Abraham Lincoln, you have Frederick Douglass, you have Robert E. Lee. Abraham Lincoln called for reconciliation. He said that it was more important to preserve the Union than punish the South. Bringing the Union together was very important in Lincoln's viewpoint. You have Frederick Douglass, who worked with Abraham Lincoln. He fought for the adoption of constitutional amendments that guaranteed voting rights. And he really pushed for abolition and African American men to be enlisted in the Union Army. We'll learn more about him. Then you have Robert E. Lee, a Virginian. He urged Southerners to reconcile with Northerners at the end of the war and reunite Americans when some wanted to continue to fight. And he became president of Washington College, which is now known as Washington Lee University, which is in Lexington, Virginia. And for this page, you're going to read each quote, and you're going to match it with the person who said it. And look at the information underneath each picture in the previous page to try to apply and think about who would make that statement. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory. And here are African Americans who were elected officials during Reconstruction. You have governors, you have senators. And like I said, one provision of Reconstruction was African Americans were elected, or not really elected, but were allowed to hold public office for the first time. And that was a novelty at that time. We have an African American president at this time. We have, we know Barack Obama is the first African American president. So none of these were presidents. You have there were governors and senators. So Reconstruction came to an end. Reconstruction ended in 1877 as a result of a compromise over the outcome of the election of 1876. Number two, federal troops were removed from the South, as you can see right there, and that's going to prove negative and harsh for African Americans who are going to need those federal troops to enforce the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which gave them equal rights and protection under the law. And as you know, you probably heard about this before, rights that African Americans had gained during Reconstruction were lost to Jim Crow laws. So everything that they got to do, the right to vote, equal protection of the law, citizenship, that was pretty much undermined. That was pretty much diminished because of Jim Crow laws. The white Southerners took over the Southern governments and basically treated African Americans as if they were like slaves again. And that lasted for like 90 years. We're going to talk more about Jim Crow. Jim Crow was basically segregation. And segregation was a disadvantage for African Americans. Basically separated you based on your color or your religion. Here's a picture of a carpetbagger. And read the information right here and do this exercise based on this textbook. Looks like Abraham Lincoln a little bit. The stovetop hat. Freedmen's Bureau. You're going to look on page 128 in your book and list some things that it did to benefit African Americans after the Civil War during Reconstruction. And here's an ad that we're going to talk about later about the KKK and Redeemers and Black Codes. We already talked about Black Codes earlier. See some scary guys in here. Scary. And you're going to do this exercise right here. You're going to analyze this cartoon and answer these questions, 1 through 5. All right. That's it.